Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of podcasts with Ollie and Aiza. I'm Ollie, and as always, I'm here with my wonderful co-host.
Hey there everyone. I'm Aiza, and wow Ollie, do we have an interesting topic for today's episode. We're going to talk about something that makes most people absolutely terrified: speaking without preparation. You know, those moments when someone suddenly asks you a question, or your boss wants your opinion right now, or you have to introduce someone at a party without any warning. Does that sound familiar to anyone listening?
Oh, trust me, it's familiar to me. Just last week, I was at a team meeting, and my manager turned to me completely out of the blue and said, "Ollie, what do you think about this new project?" And my mind just went blank. Completely empty. I could feel my heart racing, my palms getting sweaty, and I stumbled through some kind of answer that probably didn't make any sense. It's such a common experience, right? In fact, I read somewhere that around 85% of people get nervous when they have to speak in public or give their opinion on the spot. That's a huge number. And honestly, I think the other 15% might not be telling the truth about their nerves.
You're absolutely right, and that's exactly why we wanted to dedicate this entire episode to helping you. And honestly, helping ourselves to get better at speaking spontaneously. Now, when I say spontaneously, I mean speaking in the moment without having time to prepare or rehearse what you're going to say. This is different from giving a planned presentation where you have slides and notes. We're talking about everyday situations like answering questions in meetings, introducing yourself to new people, responding to unexpected requests, or even just having a conversation where you need to express your thoughts clearly and confidently. And here's the thing. These spontaneous speaking situations happen way more often than planned speeches. They're part of daily life, especially if you're learning English and trying to communicate in a second language.
Exactly. And before we dive deep into techniques and strategies, I want to address something really important that our listeners need to understand. When you're nervous about speaking, whether it's in English or your native language, that nervousness isn't actually your enemy. I know that sounds strange, but hear me out. That anxiety you feel, that racing heart, those butterflies in your stomach, they're actually your body's way of telling you that what you're about to do is important. The nervousness gives you energy and helps you focus. The problem isn't the anxiety itself. The problem is when that anxiety gets so overwhelming that it takes control and stops you from communicating effectively. So what we need to learn is not how to eliminate nervousness completely, but how to manage it, how to work with it rather than against it.
That's such an important distinction, Ollie. Managing anxiety versus trying to overcome it completely. Let me share a technique that I find really helpful. And I want to explain it using simple terms for our English learners. When you start feeling those physical symptoms of nervousness, maybe your stomach feels tight or your hands start shaking or you begin to sweat. Instead of panicking and thinking, "Oh no, everyone will see I'm nervous, this is going to be terrible," try something different. Just acknowledge what's happening. Say to yourself quietly in your mind, "This is me feeling nervous. This is normal. I'm about to do something important." That simple act of recognizing and accepting your nervousness, instead of fighting against it or being scared of it, can actually stop the anxiety from spiraling out of control. It won't make the nervousness disappear completely, but it will prevent it from getting worse and worse.
I love that technique, and I've actually started using it myself. There's another strategy that really changed how I think about speaking situations, and it has to do with how we frame the experience in our minds. Most of us, when we have to speak in front of others, we think of it as a performance. We imagine we're on stage and there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, like we're actors who need to deliver lines perfectly. But here's the reality: speaking, even when you're presenting to a group, isn't really a performance. It's a conversation. Right now, Aiza and I aren't performing for you, we're having a conversation with you. Yes, it's recorded, and yes, we prepared topics to discuss, but the feeling is conversational, not performative. When you shift your mindset from "I'm performing and I need to be perfect" to "I'm having a conversation and sharing ideas," it takes so much pressure off your shoulders.
That's brilliant, and I want to give our listeners some practical ways to make their speaking feel more conversational. Because it's not enough to just say, think of it as a conversation. You need actual techniques to create that conversational feeling. First technique: use questions. Questions are naturally conversational because they involve the other person. They're two-way, not one-way. So if you're giving your opinion about something, you might start by asking, have you ever experienced this situation? Or, what do you think about this topic? Even if it's a rhetorical question that you don't expect people to answer out loud, it still creates that conversational atmosphere. The second technique is to use conversational language. What do I mean by that? Well, instead of using formal, distant phrases like one must consider the implications, try saying we should think about what this means for us. Notice the difference. The second version uses words like we and us. It's inclusive and friendly. It sounds like you're talking with people, not lecturing at them.
Those are excellent points, Aiza. And there's one more technique for managing anxiety that I find fascinating, and it's all about bringing yourself into the present moment. You see, most of our nervousness when speaking comes from worrying about the future. We think, what if I mess up? What if people don't like what I say? What if I forget my words? All of those worries are about future consequences. But if you can train yourself to be fully present in the current moment, not thinking about what might happen later, you'll naturally feel less anxious. There are different ways to become present-oriented. Some people like to do physical activity before speaking, maybe walking around the building, doing some stretching, or even just taking deep breaths. Physical activity pulls you into your body and into the present moment. Another fun technique is saying tongue twisters. You know what a tongue twister is, right? It's a phrase that's difficult to say quickly and correctly, like, she sells seashells by the seashore. When you're concentrating on saying a tongue twister correctly, you can't be worried about the future because you're totally focused on the present task.
I actually love tongue twisters. They're great for English learners too because they help you practice difficult sounds and improve your pronunciation. But let's move on to the core strategies for speaking spontaneously because we've covered anxiety management, and now it's time to talk about what you actually do in those spontaneous speaking moments. The first major principle, and this might sound strange, is that you need to get out of your own way. What does that mean? It means you need to stop overthinking, stop trying to be perfect, stop planning every word before it comes out of your mouth. Many of us, especially if we're successful in school or work, are used to being perfectionists. We want to give the right answer, the best answer, the most impressive answer. But that perfectionist mindset actually works against you when you're speaking spontaneously because you freeze up trying to think of something brilliant to say, and meanwhile awkward silence fills the room.
That's so true, and I want to share an exercise that might sound silly but actually teaches this principle really well. Imagine you're looking around the room right now at all the objects around you, your desk, your chair, maybe a plant, a window, whatever you can see. Now, instead of calling those things by their real names, point at them and call them completely wrong names. Point at your desk and say, refrigerator. Point at your chair and say, elephant. Point at your pen and say, helicopter. The point of this exercise is to train your brain to stop overthinking and just respond in the moment. Most people, when they hear about this exercise, immediately start planning what wrong names they'll use. They think, okay, I'll go through animals in alphabetical order, or I'll name fruits and vegetables. But that's still planning, still controlling, still overthinking. The goal is to look at something and say the very first word that pops into your head, without judgment, without planning. It teaches you to trust your spontaneous responses and stop getting in your own way.
I really like that exercise because it highlights how much we try to control everything we say. And here's a phrase from the world of improvisation theater that captures this idea perfectly. Dare to be dull. I know it sounds terrible, right? Especially for people who are learning English and want to sound smart and articulate. But think about it this way. When you aim for perfection, for brilliance, for something amazing, you put enormous pressure on yourself and you often freeze up or overthink and end up saying nothing at all. But if you give yourself permission to be dull, to be ordinary, to just say something simple and honest, you actually free yourself to communicate naturally. And you know what? When you're relaxed and natural, you often end up sounding better than when you're trying too hard to be impressive. It's one of those paradoxes of communication.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the second major principle for spontaneous speaking. You need to see speaking situations as opportunities, not threats. This is a complete mindset shift that makes a huge difference. Think about when someone asks you a question or requests your opinion. Do you immediately think, oh no, I'm being put on the spot, I might say something wrong, everyone's going to judge me? That's seeing it as a threat. But what if you thought instead, great. This is a chance for me to share my ideas, to contribute to the conversation, to help people understand my perspective? That's seeing it as an opportunity. Same situation, completely different mental frame. When you see something as a threat, your body goes into defensive mode. You want to protect yourself, say as little as possible, and escape the situation. But when you see something as an opportunity, you're open, engaged, and creative. You're much more likely to have a good outcome.
And this connects to another important phrase from improvisation. Yes, and. Have you heard of this concept? In improvisation theater, when one actor says something, the other actor doesn't reject it or contradict it. Instead, they accept what was said and build on it. That's yes and. In communication, this doesn't mean you have to literally say yes to every question or agree with everything. It means you approach the interaction with an accepting, building mindset rather than a defensive, blocking mindset. So if someone asks you a difficult question, instead of thinking, no, I don't want to answer that, this is bad, you think, yes, this question gives me a chance to explain something, and I can use it to share important information. See the difference? It's about your underlying attitude toward the speaking situation.
This is really valuable stuff, and I want to make sure our English learning listeners are following along, so let me recap what we've covered so far using some key vocabulary. First, we talked about managing anxiety, which means controlling your nervousness so it doesn't control you. We discussed techniques like acknowledging your feelings, reframing the situation as a conversation instead of a performance, and staying present-oriented rather than worrying about future consequences. Then we moved into spontaneous speaking strategies, starting with getting out of your own way, which means stop overthinking and dare to be dull instead of aiming for perfection. Next, we talked about seeing speaking situations as opportunities rather than threats, and embracing the yes and mindset. Now let's talk about the third major principle, which is absolutely crucial: you must listen before you respond.
Oh, this is such an important one, and it's something most people don't do well, even in their native language. Here's what typically happens. Someone starts asking you a question or making a comment, and about halfway through you think you understand what they're saying. So you stop truly listening and you start formulating your response in your head. By the time they finish talking, you're ready to jump in with your answer. The problem is, you didn't actually hear everything they said. You heard part of it, made an assumption about the rest, and now you're answering based on that assumption. This leads to miscommunication, irrelevant responses, and missed opportunities to really connect with the other person. True listening means being fully present and focused on understanding the complete message before you start thinking about your response. As a communicator, your job is to be in service of your audience, and you can't serve them if you don't understand what they need.
I have a technique that really helps develop better listening skills, and it's kind of fun too. It involves spelling out what you're saying letter by letter. I know that sounds strange, so let me explain. Try having a conversation with someone where you spell every single word you say instead of just saying the words normally. So instead of saying, I am going to the store, you would say, I am going to the store. Now, the benefit of this exercise isn't really about the spelling, it's about what happens to your listening. When someone is spelling their words to you, you cannot zone out or start planning your response. You have to focus completely on each letter to understand what they're saying. It forces you to be present, to pay attention, and to truly listen. It's a great training exercise for developing the habit of deep listening.
I love that exercise. And it teaches you something really important. You cannot listen effectively and plan your response at the same time. Your brain doesn't multitask as well as you think it does. So there's this phrase that captures the listening principle perfectly. Don't just do something, stand there. It's a twist on the usual saying, don't just stand there, do something. But for communication, we need to reverse it. Before you jump into responding, before you start talking, just stand there. Be still. Listen fully. Understand completely. Then and only then respond. This pause, this moment of true listening, makes everything that follows better because your response will actually address what the person said instead of what you assumed they said.
Excellent point, Aiza. And now we come to the fourth and final major principle for spontaneous speaking, and this one is really practical and actionable. You need to tell a story. Now, I don't mean you need to literally tell a fairy tale or make up a narrative, Those stories are great communication tools. What I mean is that your response needs to have structure. All good stories have structure, a beginning, middle, and end. All effective communication has structure too. When you speak spontaneously, you're trying to do two very difficult things at the same time: figure out what to say and figure out how to say it. If you can solve the how to say it part by having a reliable structure, you free up your mental energy to focus on the what to say part. Structure makes communication more effective because our brains process structured information about 40% better than unstructured information. Think about phone numbers. They're easier to remember when they're structured into groups rather than just a random string of 10 digits.
So let me share 2 really useful structures that you can use in almost any spontaneous speaking situation. The first one is problem-solution benefit, and you can also think of it as opportunity-solution benefit if you're not talking about a problem. Here's how it works. You start by describing the issue or opportunity, then you explain a way to address it, and finally you describe the benefits of taking that action. For example, let's say your manager asks you at a meeting, "What do you think about our customer service response time?" You could structure your response like this. The problem is that customers currently wait 48 hours for responses, which is frustrating for them. The solution could be implementing a chatbot for common questions and prioritizing urgent requests. The benefit would be faster response times, happier customers, and reduced workload for our team. See how that structure guides both you as the speaker and your listener through a logical flow?
That's a perfect example, and here's the second structure, which I find even more versatile: what, so what, now what. You start by stating what something is, then explain why it matters, and finish with what should happen next or what the next steps are. This structure works great for answering questions, giving introductions, or explaining anything really. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're at a networking event and someone asks you what you do. You could say, "I work as a project manager in software development." That's the what. This role matters because I help teams deliver products that solve real customer problems, and I make sure everyone stays coordinated and on track. That's the so what. Right now I'm working on a mobile app launch and we're looking for beta testers, so if you're interested, I'd love to chat more. That's the now what. Notice how much more complete and engaging that is compared to just saying, "I'm a project manager."
Those structures are incredibly helpful, and I encourage all our listeners to practice using them. Here's a practice exercise you can do right now, wherever you are. Look at an object near you. Maybe your phone, a book, a cup of coffee, whatever you have. Now, imagine you need to sell that object to someone using one of these structures. If you're using problem-solution benefit, you might say, "The problem is you need to stay hydrated throughout the day, but you forget to drink water. The solution is this water bottle that has time markers on it to remind you to drink. The benefit is you'll feel more energized, improve your health, and never feel dehydrated during long meetings." Or using what so what now what. This is a reusable water bottle with measurement markings. This matters because staying hydrated is essential for focus and health, and the markings help you track your intake. What you should do now is invest in one of these bottles and commit to finishing it each day. Practice these structures with different objects or topics until they feel natural.
Before we wrap up today's episode, let me summarize everything we've covered because we've talked about a lot of techniques and strategies. First and most importantly, you need to manage your anxiety. Remember that nervousness is normal and natural. In fact, it means you care about what you're doing. The techniques we discussed were acknowledging your anxiety instead of fighting it, reframing speaking as conversation rather than performance, and becoming present-oriented through physical activity, music, or tongue twisters. Once you have your anxiety under control, you can apply 4 key principles for spontaneous speaking. Principle 1. Get out of your own way by letting go of perfectionism and daring to be dull. Principle 2. See the situation as an opportunity rather than a threat, and embrace the yes and mindset. Principle 3. Truly listen before responding, giving the other person your complete attention. And Principle 4. Use structure to organize your response, whether that's problem-solution benefit or what so what now what or any other clear framework.
And remember, all of these skills require practice. You won't master them just by listening to this podcast once. You need to practice in real situations, in low-stakes environments where you feel comfortable experimenting. Practice these structures when talking to friends or family. Play the shout the wrong name game when you're alone to train yourself to get out of your own way. Try spelling conversations to improve your listening. The more you practice, the more natural these techniques will become, and eventually you'll find yourself handling spontaneous speaking situations with much more confidence and ease. For our English learners specifically, remember that you're dealing with an extra challenge. Not only are you trying to speak spontaneously, but you're doing it in a language that isn't your native tongue. Be patient with yourself. Give yourself credit for every time you communicate successfully, even if it's not perfect. Progress, not perfection, is the goal.
That's such an important reminder, Aiza. And I want to leave everyone with one final thought. The ability to speak confidently in spontaneous situations isn't just a nice skill to have, it's essential for success in almost every area of life. Whether you're in business meetings, social gatherings, job interviews, or just everyday conversations, you'll constantly find yourself in situations where you need to think on your feet and express yourself clearly without preparation time. The good news is that this is a learnable skill. You're not born good or bad at spontaneous speaking. You develop these abilities through understanding the principles we've discussed today and through consistent practice. Every interaction is an opportunity to get better. Every question someone asks you is a chance to practice listening deeply and responding with structure. Every moment of nervousness is an opportunity to acknowledge it, accept it, and work with it rather than against it.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. We've covered so much ground today, from managing anxiety to specific techniques for spontaneous speaking, and we hope you found it valuable and practical. Remember, communication is not about being perfect. It's about being genuine, clear, and connected with your audience. When you focus on truly listening to others, seeing conversations as opportunities for connection, and organizing your thoughts with simple structures, you'll find that spontaneous speaking becomes less scary and more enjoyable. Thank you so much for joining us today on Podcast with Ali and Aiza. We love hearing from our listeners, so if you have questions about today's topic or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to us. Keep practicing your English, keep challenging yourself to speak even when you feel nervous, and most importantly, keep growing and learning. Until next time, this is Aiza
and Ali, wishing you confidence, clarity, and courage in all your conversations. Take care, everyone, and we'll talk to you very soon.